A relationship with the right referral partner could be a game changer for any B2B company. So what if you could reverse engineer these relationships at a moment's notice? Start a podcast, invite potential referral partners to be guests on your show, and grow your referral network faster than ever. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to the B2B Growth Show, a podcast dedicated to helping B2B executives achieve explosive growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. I'm James Carberry.
And I'm Jonathan Green.
Let's get into the show. Welcome back to the B2B Growth Show. We're here today with Tim Riesterer. He is the Chief Strategy and Research Officer at Corporate Visions. He's also the author of Conversations That Win the Complex Sale, as well as the 3 Value Conversations, both from McGraw-Hill. So you'll definitely want to check out Corporate Visions, also check out his books. But Tim, how are you doing today?
Great, James. Thanks for having me today.
So I'm really excited to chat with you today, Tim. We're going to be talking about the science behind customer messaging and selling conversations. You've obviously wrote a couple books on this. This is something you're incredibly passionate about. Just to give just a little bit of context to our listeners so they know a little bit more of the background to this before we dive into this conversation, talk to us about a little bit more about what Corporate Visions does and how your story kind of blends in with what the company is doing.
Sure. At a high level, Corporate Visions is in the business of helping companies construct their sales messaging and then delivering that sales messaging. So building the message and then deploying that through content assets as well as skills development for salespeople. So I like to say that my job is based on that moment in front of a customer where a salesperson's lips move, and that a guy can get paid for doing that. It's pretty amazing. And so that's what Corporate Visions does. And my role in the company as strategy and research officer is to bring these ideas to life, not as opinion, not as surveys, but we actually go out and run simulations with would-be customers through academic partnerships and develop frameworks for messaging that then the message builders, the marketers, and the message tellers, often your sales or distribution channel, can use those frameworks to build the content and to know how to deliver that in a way that is most effective.
This is super interesting. So it's not the traditional kind of survey. You're not just going out and sending these surveys or getting these opinions from people. You're actually setting up these simulations, like you called it. So as we dive into this, Tim, as we were talking offline, you said conversations are typically seen as an art, but there's actually science to it. Can you talk to us about this?
Yeah. So the big deal here is we delineate between the idea of best practices and what I call decision science. So we live in the world of decision science, where you look at the invisible forces that shape the way buyers frame value and make choices. And often that happens in the part of the brain that doesn't even contain the capacity for language. So when you ask a customer, hey, what would cause you to change and do something different, and how might you justify it? They will tell you, but they're actually telling it to you from the logical part of the brain that will explain and reason their decision, not the part of the brain that actually has to unhook itself from the status quo, make the decision to change and undertake that. So the big deal here is when you survey people and ask them things, they're unwittingly lying to you. They're telling you how they're going to reason it and explain it, but it isn't actually how they're going to dislodge from their status quo.
Okay.
And so it's we love the sciences of neuroscience, social psychology, and behavioral economics, which is buyer-centric inherently from the standpoint of how they make decisions, versus sometimes surveys and opinions where either you're asking the marketer, the salesperson, or even the customer to offer what they think or feel is happening versus what scientifically has been proven to happen. So once you know this is a science and not an art, and you can start to make things more concrete and build these frameworks and work from those.
Got it. So could you share, what would a framework look like? Call it company XYZ, Tim, if you were just thinking back on, clients you've worked with in the past, just so I can give like a tangible example of what a listener could expect, after going through either, purchasing your service, or show us what it looks like on the other end of it.
Yeah. So fundamentally the framework is an ordered sort of choreography for a certain message. So if you think of the buyer's journey and think of it holistically, there's a point where the buyer needs to make a decision to change, to leave their status quo, believe their status quo is no longer safe or sustainable or acceptable. And that requires a certain way to organize and deliver that message. And we have what we call the why change framework. So when you're in that mode, whether it's in demand gen or early stage prospecting, you want to tell a story that's organized in the why change framework, tested, proven, and I can come back to that second, but I want you to think of the buyer's journey. We've then run tests on something we call the why you framework. What order should you tell a story that best differentiates you from a competitive alternative? Then at some point, you're going to get customers and you want to renew them and they're on recurring licenses. And we've built a best framework for what we call the why stay message and conversation. And just recently, we built one around what we call the why pay, which is a framework for best communicating a price increase. And our next one that we plan to do is what we call the why now. There's a moment in between why change, why you, and why stay, why pay, called why now, that final compel them to actually pull the trigger and make that decision. And what you want to see when you work with us is that you have these different moments of truth along the buyer or if you will, the customer's life cycle that you message in. And what you want to do is apply the framework that's been shown to dislodge the status quo or differentiate you or move them to close or get them to renew or more willingly accept a price increase. So when we engage a company, we run messaging exercises against these frameworks to build your story within this framework. And then once the story's built, we'll build the content assets, we create visual story assets, and we then roll it out and teach the sales force the story and the skills behind the story, right? They need to understand why it's organized the way it is so they understand there's a reason for the choreography in place.
Got it. Okay. And so you're using the same frameworks for each of the companies you're working with, but they're obviously catered to each company you work with based on what their product or service is, who their market is. Would you be able, Tim, to share maybe one of these frameworks to give people an idea of what you guys are working with over there?
Sure. So let's take the why change framework. Everybody is trying to generate new opportunities and dislodge incumbents and begin to distinguish yourself from the competitors. But first, get people off of status quo, defeat inertia. And it's a 4-stage framework that first identifies that you must introduce an unconsidered need. If you simply respond to the stated needs of the customer, with the typical capabilities in your portfolio, you will commoditize your dialogue, and you will also convince them that they are certain of their situation. The power of persuasion in the why change means you have to introduce uncertainty. So step 1 in that framework, introduce an unconsidered need, a problem or opportunity the customer didn't know they had. Step 2 in that framework, show them the flaw in their current approach, the limitations, the gaps, the challenges in the way they're doing things today. That means they won't be able to respond to that need. And as a result, they won't be able to get the outcome they're looking for. So you have unconsidered need, flawed current approach, which creates a context for urgency. Movement number 3 then is to show the contrasting new way that you resolve that risk that you just introduced. And the key there in the brain is that the brain requires the sense of contrast, what they're doing today and what you're recommending, in order to see the value of making the change. And then after you share the contrast, you have to share a good before and after story. We call it a before and after hero story to demonstrate that somebody else has done this successfully. So unconsidered need introduces the uncertainty. Flawed current approach helps them realize there's a risk to be resolved. Contrasting new way, which is what you're doing different and better, helps them see the value of making a change. And then the safe zone is that somebody else has done this before who looks like you, was in the same spot as you, but is now in a better place. So that's if you will, the story framework for a why change story. We've tested that and proven that is the most persuasive, the most unique and different, and the highest quality perception for the vendor and their story. And those 4 steps we bring into a workshop and we work you through that. So really, we find the unconsidered needs that you solve for, and we find the contrasting new way you solve it better than anybody else in that workshop. So that's how it becomes yours.
Got it.
But what you want is a framework that has been tested and proven to lay your story into.
And the way that you guys came up with these frameworks, Tim, is through these simulations. Is that right?
Well, the simulations actually test it. So we develop hypothesis rooted in current science. So this one was rooted in the science of status quo bias. After 30 years of research, they've proven that people prefer to live in their status quo. And they've identified 4 reasons for it. And so as a result, if you want to defeat the status quo, you must address and defeat each of the 4 reasons people stick with status quo. So each of those movements in the framework were identified by determining how would we defeat each of those 4 causes. So each of those 4 movements is very purposefully designed to address one and then the next reason people stick with status quo. So we said, okay, this should be a good framework. So let's take this framework and then let's create other test conditions that are very like what we see many companies doing today, and then see how people react in a simulated environment. So we take decision science proven in other fields and put it in a B2B marketing and sales messaging simulation with that hypothesis in place from the original science. Does that make sense?
No, it totally does. I love it. This has been super helpful for me, Tim. This idea of having a framework that you can then run your own. Even if folks aren't in a place where they can work with you on this, I think just having this framework for the why change to be able to run their own brand through, I think is incredibly helpful. Introducing an unstated need, showing the flaw in the prospect's current approach, showing the contrast of the risk that you've now introduced by showing them a different way of doing it, and then giving them that safe zone, really essentially a case study in essence of here's somebody that looks like you that has done the same thing and the results that have come as a result of it. So that 4-part framework, incredibly helpful. If there's somebody listening, Tim, maybe they want to stay connected with you, they want to learn more about corporate visions, what's the best way for them to go about doing that?
Yeah, and they're going to want to check out like the why stay, why pay to realize that you need different frameworks at different times, because we've tested this same framework in other conditions and found out it doesn't work. In fact, it backfires. So when you are the status quo, you might not want to disrupt the status quo. So stay tuned for that. So they can go to corporatevisions.com, and so it's one word, corporatevisions.com, and hit the resources tab. There are webcasts on these topics, infographics, videos, ebooks, and they are simply identified: why change, why stay, why pay. Yeah. So it should be easy to navigate and free. And so we publicize these frameworks. We believe in the abundance mentality. We want to give people something they can work with and would love to work with them as well. But we believe in giving them some tools based on our research and sharing that with folks.
I love it. Tim, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. I think this is going to add an enormous amount of value to anyone listening, so I really appreciate it.
Thanks, James. Appreciate the opportunity.
To ensure that you never miss an episode of the B2B Growth Show, subscribe to the show in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. This guarantees that every episode will get delivered directly to your device.
If you or someone you know would be an incredible guest for the B2B Growth Show, email me at jonathan@sweetfishmedia.com and let us know. We love connecting with B2B executives, and we love sharing their wisdom and perspective with our audience.
Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.